There was no crowd to cheer for him this time. No Tesla stock ticker to flash green. No stage, no spotlight. Just a sterile courtroom, cold wood paneling, and the faint buzz of overhead lights. Elon sat quietly at the defendant's table, his palms flat on the polished oak. His jaw tightened, not out of defiance, but restraint. He wasn't here to defend himself. Not really. He was here for something far more difficult. Accepting that no matter how high he'd climbed, he still had to kneel before the law like everyone else. And across the bench, the judge was already frowning. The Honorable Judge Raymond Keller was not a man prone to kindness. In his courtroom, control was religion and mercy a myth. He saw men like Musk as symbols of what was broken. Too much power, too little humility. "You may be worth billions, Mr. Musk," Keller said, without looking up from the stack of papers before him. "But in here, you're just another man who thinks the rules don't apply to him." There was a pause. Elon didn't flinch. "I understand, Your Honor," he said quietly. His legal team had advised him not to speak unless prompted. But something in Elon's stillness, the way he studied the grain of the wood under his fingertips, spoke more than any prepared defense could. This hearing wasn't about fraud or privacy or X or Tesla or Neuralink. It was a smaller matter, almost symbolic, a dispute over labor regulations at a minor production facility in upstate New York. But it had found its way into federal court after years of appeals. Keller leaned forward. "When a man builds rockets, he starts to believe he's above gravity. But gravity always wins, Mr. Musk." A few people in the courtroom chuckled under their breath. Elon didn't move. But inside, he felt the heat of humiliation press against his ribs. Still, he stayed silent. The questioning continued. Elon's attorney answered most of it, articulating compliance measures, timelines, community outreach. Elon spoke only when directly addressed. But then, something shifted. Judge Keller set down his pen, took off his glasses, and looked directly at Musk. "Tell me something," he said. "When you fire workers who try to organize, do you feel anything at all? Or is empathy another thing you've automated?" Gasps rippled softly through the room. Even the court stenographer paused. Elon blinked. A long moment passed. He wasn't known for his emotions, rarely wept in public, hardly smiled in interviews. But there was something in his eyes now, soft but undeniable. "I know what it feels like," he said, voice low. "To build something that matters. To ask people to believe in it. I don't always get it right. But I never forget their people." The judge smirked. "You've got the world eating out of your hand. Spare us the poetry." It wasn't just disrespect. It was cruelty. Measured, deliberate. Elon turned his eyes down again. Not in defeat, but in the hard-earned discipline of a man who had learned, again and again, that silence often speaks the loudest. At the back of the courtroom, a voice stirred. "Your Honor," said a quiet, older man. Gray suit, thin-framed glasses, calm eyes. "May I speak?" It was the court's chief ethics officer, Martin Reyes. A former judge himself, long retired, but occasionally consulted in sensitive hearings like this one. His presence had been mostly ceremonial, until now. Judge Keller hesitated. "You may," he said, leaning back. Reyes walked forward slowly. His steps were measured, deliberate. He didn't look at Elon. He looked only at the bench. "Judicial conduct," Reyes began, "is not merely a matter of law. It's a matter of dignity. For the court. For the people who come before it. Even the rich. Even the flawed." Keller shifted in his seat. "This is my courtroom, Martin." "It was your courtroom," Reyes replied. "Until you made it personal." There was a silence, so deep it seemed to drain the air from the walls. Elon's eyes met Reyes's briefly. No gratitude, just recognition. Reyes turned back to the bench. "We don't insult people here. Not even when we disagree with what they've built." Minutes later, the bailiff approached the bench. A folded note. Keller read it. The color drained from his face. He stood. "I've just been informed," he said slowly, "that the Judicial Conduct Committee has requested I recuse myself pending review." His voice cracked, barely. A marshal entered quietly through the side door. Not dramatic, just present. "Judge Keller," Reyes said gently, "you are not above gravity either." The judge's lips tightened. He looked at Elon once. Not with regret, just surprise. The kind of surprise that comes when a man realizes, perhaps for the first time, that the world no longer bends for him. Keller was let out, not in shackles, not publicly humiliated, just removed. The courtroom didn't applaud. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. After the room had emptied, Elon remained seated. Just for a moment. His attorney stood beside him. "We could go," she said gently. But Elon shook his head. "I need a minute." Outside the courtroom, the press waited. Flashes, microphones, speculation. But inside, it was still, no noise, no motion, just a lingering sense that something had shifted. He looked down at the polished wood where his hands had rested hours earlier. For the first time that day, he exhaled, not out of relief, but acceptance. He didn't feel victorious. He felt human. Elon rose slowly. As he turned, he saw Martin Reyes by the door, adjusting his cuffs with that same steady calm. "Thank you," Elon said softly. Reyes looked up. "You didn't need to say anything," he replied. "But I'm glad you did." There was a pause, an unspoken acknowledgement between two men who understood that respect isn't owed by status, but earned in restraint. And then Reyes added, with a nod, "You held your ground with grace. That matters." Outside, the cameras waited. But as Elon stepped through the courtroom doors, there was no smirk, no grand gesture, just a quiet steadiness in his step. He didn't stop for questions. He didn't need to, because some trials aren't about guilt or innocence. They're about who we choose to be when we're not in control. That day, Elon Musk didn't win by outsmarting the system. He didn't win with a tweet or a comeback. He won by standing still, by letting the truth speak louder than pride. And in a world where power often masks insecurity, where outrage overshadows integrity, a quiet moment of dignity became the loudest statement of all. It was a reminder, for him, and for us all, that real strength is never in dominance. It's in restraint, in knowing who you are, even when the world forgets. And sometimes, when the noise fades and the cameras stop flashing, that's the only victory that truly lasts. If this story spoke to something in you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to stay grounded, even when the world is watching, then we invite you to stay with us. Like this video to let us know it meant something. Subscribe to Soulful Stories for more deeply human, real-world tales like this one, where power meets vulnerability and silence sometimes speaks the loudest. And be sure to click the bell icon so you'll never miss the next story that stirs the heart, invites reflection, and stays with you long after it ends.